What's up, everybody? I've had to think too much on a couple of the last videos, so I want one where I can just read and ponder some things and I don't have to explain myself. This book is Connor McDarry, Irish Wisdom Preserved in the Bible and Pyramids. McDarry is among several authors and researchers I've been checking out lately, and for lack of a better term, I'd call them Atlantocentrics. One of the thoughts is that the British Isles are remnants of Atlantis, and who knows, maybe it was land all the way up to Greenland and that was Hyperborea and it all got buried by volcanoes. I don't know. But the other idea here is that the British Isles were kind of the cradle of civilization. Some say that the events of the Old Testament happen here. Others say that Jesus came and lived on the Isles, and I need to do a whole video on that one. I mean, they're not vague about it. They say, hey, he lived right down there. But, I'm still not sure how much of this I'm buying. But one thing that will get everybody's attention is their attitude towards the Church of Rome, and pretty well a consensus that they've changed history. Before I start, there is some connection between the British Isles and Egypt. There's red haired mummies in Egypt. Not sure if that's related, but the stone of Scone is used for coronation ceremonies, crowning a monarch that has Egyptian ties. There's Scotia, a queen that I think moved to the British Isles. And the modern Scots used to live over on Ireland. It's kind of a complex thing I'm trying to figure out. But I know they say that the modern day Scots came from Ireland a few hundred years ago. Chapter 1: The Problem of the Pyramids. The solution of the mystery of the pyramids of Egypt has been a problem which has not only puzzled mankind in general during the ages of the past, but which has as well mystified the minds of scholars and thinkers even to this our present day. For expecting the select few who were initiates of the ancient priesthood to whom it was a carefully guarded secret, no others knew or understood its full import or significance. Then he goes on for way too long about the magnificence and splendor of the pyramids, following with, it was conceived and put into effect by the ruling spirits at the head of the Roman Church and state of their day, who cherished the ambitious and far reaching idea of nothing less than universal rule for their church and empire. In the course of these pages, I will endeavor to explain and expose the conspiracy and the means by which those designing men who composed it advanced their project, and with the aid of their successors, they, I propose to show, by persistent effort, brought the greater part of the Western world under their empire and church dominion, and brought this conspiracy to an almost complete success. It was the idea that was held by the leaders of the Roman Church and state that all power should be centralized in the head of the church, who was also emperor of the state, and any and all religious institutions which in any way conflicted with this ideal were to be done away with. For this reason, the mystery cults were suppressed and initiation into the ancient or esoteric mysteries were forbidden. The Great Pyramid of Iesa was used as a temple of initiation for inculcating the mysteries of nature and the occult powers of the soul. The decree of the church and the execution of its policy to close the Great Pyramid Temple and suppress its institution practically put an end to the development of enlightened minds in the Nile Valley. The way was then clear for the unopposed spread of superstition and cruel fanaticism among the masses. With the Great Pyramid closed, its passages filled up with stone and rubbish, its initiate priest banished by the way was paid for the long night of darkness and ignorance which followed, and which is known in history as the Dark Ages. It is my belief that it was always known and in the possession of ruling spirits of the Church of Rome and the high priest of the Church of England. It is interesting how he refers to the church as spirits. The Great Pyramid and the group of which it is the premier, together with the temples of the Nile Valley, are the most convincing witnesses and testimonials, offering no chance for contradiction or uncertainty as to the accomplishments and genius of the Irish. He doesn't exactly explain how he came to these conclusions at this point, but he's got some good points on Irish words coming up. But he's saying that the Irish and the Aryan race is one and the same. And some of the things I've seen lately makes it look almost like the Phoenicians might have been from Britain or the North Atlantic. And it kind of makes sense because the Mediterranean is a really protected sea. Going out into the Atlantic and battling 50-foot waves is a whole different ballgame. So, in more recent times, the Irish were famous sailors, the Vikings, and all people that actually lived on open ocean. So, it makes more sense that comes from an open ocean area as opposed to a protected bay in the Mediterranean. But back to the genius of the ancient Irish. In their great missionary pilgrimage, they circled the globe in order to give religion and a knowledge of God to the different races of mankind. They also established priesthoods and gave alphabets to the races who were unenlightened in such matters up to that time. Ireland is the country in which the arts and sciences were first discovered and developed. To this country, the Greeks applied the term agigia, a term which was never given but to the very ancient, and it is from the Irish. So here they're saying it's a mythical island. But Commons Beaumont pointed out some landmarks that line up pretty good with the Odyssey. But Agigia, given to the very ancient, and it is from the Irish that the Greeks traced their descent. Now, every time he says Irish, he has Aryan in parentheses here. I'm sticking with Irish because that's not a favorable word. They think I'm talking about the Germansies. To the Irish Magi, we owe the discovery of fire and the common grains which they developed from the grasses. They were the first people to practice agriculture. They invented the common tools of workmanship, which have come down to us practically unchanged from those ancient times. There is no mistaking the monuments left by the Irish, who were once the rulers and masters of the whole earth. Their rule embraced all countries, it was worldwide. Ireland was the first mistress of the sea. It was the first and only worldwide empire which has ever been known, for it was spiritual. It was greater in extent than Persia, Greek, Roman, or Mogul ever attained to. The remains of their work, wherever they are found, bear an unmistakable similarity in shape and character. They are huge, immense, and conceived and carried out on a plan so extensive that it awes the mind of man today. Then he lists countries all around the world, and it sounds like what he's saying is the megaliths and the pyramids are of Irish origin. He also lists this tower in Rhode Island, which is evidently of mysterious origins. And he continues, and the great pyramidal mounds of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, also the ruined temples of Yucatan and similar remains in South America, are all evidences of their handiwork. And like that Prince Madoc video I did of the Welsh travelers that came over, it said the quote Welsh Indians were responsible for all of these earthworks, like Serpent Mound. And according to McDarry here, all owe their origins to the same source, and they establish beyond any doubt, he's real certain of himself all the time here, that the Irish were the real discoverers of America and that they established civilization on this western continent. The very name of God among the Indians of our country was an Irish name derived from those missionaries and explorers centuries before Columbus or Eric the Red were born. One of the Irish names of God is Man, and Manatha is the Irish word for holy. The Indian name for God was Manitau, the Holy One. The Indians also had another name for God, and this again was Irish. It was Manabasha, the sun god. It is a compound word with the root word man, holy, and basha, of the cows, the bull, virtually the same as Baal, the Irish sun god. So that's really interesting that he's claiming that Baal is an Irish word. And there's several things here suggesting that they may have swapped around Irish and Eastern Mediterranean culture. In ancient times, the ruler of the state held two offices jointly in his own person, that of king or emperor and that of head of the church in his dominion. The fact of his holding such autocratic power led to the assumption of attributes of divinity in order to hold the people in awe of him. The qualities of divinity we have seen attributed to rulers in our day. The head of the Irish state church held this supreme pontifical power in Europe until challenged first by Persia, then by Greece, and later by Rome, who, when a favorable time arrived for her to assert her independence, set up jointly a church and state for herself. For let it be known, Rome was at one time a colony of Ireland. Rome is a compound of two Irish words, ro meaning before and ome meaning body, earth, or grave. But in its mythic meaning, it is made to signify before heaven, ro, and earth, ome. The two together meaning heaven and earth, hence the eternal city Rome. The river of Rome, the Tiber, also bears an Irish name. It derives its name from tuber, the Irish word for a well or spring of water. Hence, the Tiber is the spring water river. And as the poet Longfellow truly says, their names are on your waters, and ye may not wash them out. That's interesting. And really, you look at a map from Europe from 500 years ago, and it's all different names. So who knows what was going on before the Roman era. Bonfrey L. Geiger and other students of the ancient Indo-European languages have recently advanced the opinion that the original home of Indo-European races must be sought in Europe because their stock of words is rich in the names of plants and animals and contains names of seasons that are not found in tropical countries or anywhere else in Asia. That's a good point. Why do you need a name for summer and winter if you don't have one? Muller says, the nations who are comprehended under the common appellation of Indo-European, the Hindus, the Persians, the Celts, Germans, Romans, Greeks, and Slavs, do not only share the same words and the same grammar, slightly modified in each country, but they seem to have likewise preserved a mass of popular traditions which had grown up before they left their common home. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but with quite a few other languages, you can make out a lot of the nouns in there because it's just slightly different than the English version that we know. Like I recently looked into the underground structures under the pyramid guy, Corrado Malanga. That press conference was in Italian, but I could turn the captions on and I could follow the basic gist of what he was talking about. So this all does suggest commonality back in the past. To obscure knowledge of this homeland and the reason for doing so have engaged the greatest organized propaganda for spreading misinformation that we have any knowledge of, as will become apparent in these pages. I hope so, because you're making some big claims here. We are told that the Phoenicians planted those colonies and that they came from the east, from the coast of what is now Syria or Phoenicia, as they say it was formerly called. Ireland is the homeland of the Phoenicians, which word is a secret name for the insular race of mariners and traders who carried on commerce with the whole world. Sidon and Tyre are mythic names applied for the purpose of deception to the two cities at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. Sidon is an Irish word and means the hips or buttocks. Tyre means the earth or body. And the purple color or dye, which we are told made this city famous, is the blood which courses through the body. He's referring to the Tyrian purple there. The coast of Syria was never suited to the needs of a seafaring race. Such a race never developed there. Exactly, that's what I've been saying for a while. But Ireland, an island indented with bays, loughs, and harbors, was suitable to the development of just such a race as we should expect to find there. For secret reasons, the name of Phoenicians was applied to the Irish race. It is written purposely in this form of spelling, which has served well in throwing people off the track and helped very well in keeping up the deception. If they had written the word in its plain form of Phoenician with an F, There would be too many who were liable to see the true meaning of it and thereby get a clue to the real truth which was meant to be concealed. The word Fion or Finn is an Irish name of the sun, and the Phoenicians were the Irish sun worshippers or magician priests of Iesa, the Irish sun god, who brought their civilization and arts, already developed in Ireland, with them to Egypt. There, they erected their monumental altars to the god of the sun, of which the Great Pyramid was the crowning symbol and masterpiece. They carried their mission from there to the further lands of the east. Okay, so this is what I've been thinking for a while about the Phoenicians. Does it make sense that a master seafaring race would come from the desert lands of Canaan, modern Yeezy and Syria? Our modern version says that they started out over around the Holy Land and then branched out over to Carthage area. Then they just kept going out into the open waters of the Atlantic, which is a whole different ballgame than the Mediterranean. If you built what you thought was a strong ship in the Mediterranean and took it out into the Atlantic, you'd get smashed to pieces. Also, this is what the landscape looks like in the Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, this area is famous for 1001 Arabian Nights and horses, not shipbuilding. What kind of trees are growing out here to make massive ocean ships with? I looked up the largest tree in this area, and a Bengal ficus tree with a height of about 15 meters is a record-breaking tree around there. I've got 2 trees larger than that hanging over my house right now that needs to be cut down. I mean, their biggest tree is just an average tree for around here, or a regular wooded area. It's not disputed in the least that Phoenicians went to the British Isles and to Ireland back in the day, and that's really just a name that we're giving to people who traveled in these types of ships. There's this documentary on here about Jesus visiting Britain, and they mention the Phoenician ships in there. But could they have totally flipped this around backwards on us? And instead of the Phoenicians being from the Mediterranean that were able to visit the North Atlantic, they were actually from the North Atlantic, to where once they got down to the Mediterranean, it was smooth sailing. And then that line of thinking opens up a whole huge historical can of worms here. Because let me give you ancient history in a nutshell here. You had the ancient Carthaginians that were the rulers of the Mediterranean. Then there were the Punic Wars, and Rome beat Carthage, and they became the rulers of the Mediterranean, although Rome really doesn't have a port to speak of, which has been a big red flag for a while with me. Then you have the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the barbarian invasion, which is how they refer to the northern Germanic tribes, Nordic, aka white. But then that blue line down on the left and bottom, that's the Vandals, and they came down and they took over Carthage. So kind of a what if here, but what if the Phoenicians were originally from the North Atlantic? They sailed down and settled North Africa, founded Carthage, and well, one of their famous gods is Baal Haman, which according to McDarry here, Baal is an Irish name. And that line of thinking would basically suggest that Semitic culture hijacked Irish culture. And remember, we're using the name Irish where most people would use this name. And now check this out. 100 years ago, the bad guys had their own archaeological institutions looking into the ancient past. And they were saying that the roots of civilization came from the Irish or Hyperborean, and that civilized people basically came from the north. And, this idea is repeated over into Persia and India. But our institutions, who are ran by people with certain persuasions, say, oh, that's just pseudoscience. But the truth is, civilization came from Semitic origins. And, nobody thought that way prior to 1945 and Dub Deuce. So the camel-riding desert dwellers of the Eastern Mediterranean invented language, civilization, and the arts, and they were master shipbuilders from a desert in a protected harbor. The Great Pyramid of Iesa, and I'm pretty sure he's meaning Jesus by that, the Bible, and the Irish language, through means of these aids, we have been able to reveal the truth which has been buried beneath a mass of myth and fiction by the priests of Rome and their British collaborators. Honest and, we believe, impartial investigators have confessed themselves at a loss to account for the origin of Egypt's civilization with its arts and sciences. It did not seem like other things. There was such silence about it, and a mysterious absence of facts regarding its birth, which was most puzzling. It did not appear to grow from small beginnings and gradually advance to a better and more perfect state by successive stages. It seemed as if it was so from the beginning. No trace of early beginnings could be found by investigators. Now, these are not the natural or usual features of a civilization which is native to any country or society. Such a civilization as Egypt had could not be developed suddenly and come into being at once any more than an oak tree could spring from the acorn full grown. Many writers have noted this peculiarity about Egypt's history and her civilization without happening on the key which would solve the puzzle, as they were not aware of the existence of a plot to conceal her history. They were not suspicious enough of the priests who wrote her history as they would have us see it. As Renan says of Egypt, it has no archaic epoch. So, do you guys remember hearing that the Egyptians were originally Atlanteans? Well, this is a lot along those lines, if not the exact same thing, and would explain why the first stuff built was the best stuff built. And it seems like everything regressed instead of progressed from the earliest days. Anyway, like I said, I'm not sure how much I believe. I hope he brings some good receipts here. But with stuff like this, I'm not necessarily agreeing with their overall theory of things, but then you come across things like the information about the Phoenicians, and you got more puzzle pieces to fit together because, yeah, it makes way more sense that the masters of the sea came from where there's open ocean and trees. You got to have some massive trees if you want to make a big, huge ocean-going ship. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.